All right, well, welcome back to Client Builder Playbook. Another episode here, Larry, and I think we should continue on with talking about the importance of a system.
Yeah. So we've been talking about the principles, and the last couple episodes we've discussed have been primarily about this concept of how people make buying decisions emotionally.
Yep.
And our goal in terms of taking problems and turning them into pain. I think we need to let our listeners understand where this fits in the context of a system or a process. And I think the first point that we've really got to emphasize here is that if you're going to be successful when selling, you really need to have a repeatable process that you do consistently, appointment in, appointment out. Would you agree with that?
I mean, well, let me ask you this. I mean, what happens to the guys and women that are just winging it?
Well, you tell me. Because I think for
let me just tell you, it goes horribly.
About 15 years before you met
Yeah.
me, that's what you were
Yeah.
doing.
Yes, yeah.
And
yeah, frustrating. You don't know where you stand with anybody in the conference room. And you know, the one thing I love about running the Client Builder system is the fact that you're not going to get everybody. All right. Let's just face that. You're not going to get everybody. But gosh darn it, I know if I don't get them, I gave myself the highest probability of success or chance of getting them.
Yep.
And the other thing is, if you want to scale, there's a lot of advisors out there today that want to scale.
Yep.
If you hire advisors onto your team without a system and process, and they start just doing what they want to do, you're going to have a mess on your hands.
Oh.
And let me tell you how powerful this is. This has happened multiple times. Okay, but it's happened when I was still in production. Neil had gone out on. Neil was one of my first advisors we hired, right? So he goes out on vacation. Guy calls in, wants to talk to Neil. He wants to cancel his case because he read something online about indexed annuities. Okay,
Right.
so I said, well, send him over to me. And I have a conversation with him. And he says, that's exactly what Neil said. That's exactly what Neil said. Neil made that same point. And he's become one of Neil's best clients. And then it happened the other way around. I went out on vacation. A guy tried to back out on me, right?
Yeah.
And gets on the phone with Neil. And he's one of my best clients.
So think about what that is in the context of another business. I mean, when
it's the French fries being made the same way in Pennsylvania as they are being made in Arizona.
I know that if I buy a Toyota Land Cruiser in Pittsburgh, that it's going to be the same Toyota Land Cruiser that I might buy in Minneapolis. And Toyota does a pretty good job of making sure that their dealers follow the same procedures when it comes to warranties, when it comes to service, when it comes to, that's what gives the brand Toyota the power, okay? And I think, in other words, using a sales process and having everybody on your team following that same process means that you now have a quality control process in place.
Absolutely.
Because essentially, when they're buying from you, when they're buying from your firm, what they're buying is that sales process.
That's right.
I mean, because that's the people that interface with your clients, not only on the first and second appointment, but at every annual review and every meeting in between. And that's what brings consistency, and that consistency is what builds your brand.
Let me tell you how powerful this is. To further reinforce how powerful this is, we hired an advisor, veteran advisor, 20 years in the business, and you trained him. You had mentioned to me a number of times after training that he doesn't seem very engaged. He says, yeah, I've seen all this before, blah, 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 blah. So I started to slowly come out of production.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of my good clients, my servicing advisor, Maggie, was seeing, and she was starting to make the transition to this new advisor.
Right.
He pissed off so many people.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, this is just about a month ago, Larry. I sat down with some people that he had met with, good clients of mine.
Wow.
And they basically told me everything that, one, he said he didn't believe in having safe money, that you could get better returns with bonds. He went into just didn't follow any of our annual review process or anything. They were so furious about the process not being followed. They're so used to it, right? They're so used to talking to Maggie, to me, and it didn't matter who they talked to in the firm. They heard the same thing,
Yeah.
right? And it was addressed the same thing.
Wow.
The way that he asked questions, the way that he brought them through the review, every part of it,
Yeah.
he did it his way,
Mm-hmm.
which is the way of the industry,
Right.
which is broken.
Right.
You and I know that.
Right.
And so when you're getting that type of feedback from good clients of yours, that further reinforces why a system and a process is so important. You will not scale your financial firm
Yeah.
with any degree of success without following a process. And in my opinion, the client builder process is the best.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's where you really see the power of this process take off. Now, when I first started working with you,
Mm-hmm.
you were the only advisor in your firm that was going after new business.
Correct.
So it changed your world.
Yeah.
But where we started to see economies of scale and we started to see the traction is when we had every one of the new advisors that you brought on operating from the same playbook. And that's why we came up with the name Client Builder Playbook.
That's right.
By the way. And the beauty of it is they could listen to each other's sales calls
Yes.
and provide coaching and guidance to one another. And what happens so frequently is that when we're on a sales call, we're so emotionally involved in our call that we can't always see what's happening. And another set of eyes will know what you're trying to do, but where you kind of got off track. And that's pretty powerful. And the beauty of having a process is where, well, let's think about
You
it
can
again.
also self-diagnose.
Exactly.
So you can listen to your own meeting and go, I screwed that up. I missed
Exactly.
that step. I missed that step. Why didn't I drill down further there?
Yeah. It's no different than if you were to go to a doctor and you're having an x-ray taken and you're trying to figure out, or the doctor's trying to figure out where the problem is. Well, if he doesn't have a set of x-rays that show what the knee should look like, or what the shoulder should look like, or what a set of clean lungs should look like, if he doesn't have that to start from, how does he know what's broken?
Yeah, great point.
Or if you don't have certain guidance when you get your blood work back from the cardiologist,
Yes.
if you don't know what a healthy set of blood measurements looks like, how do you know what's off? And so the key to having a process is we have an overall strategy fueled by a set of tactics designed to optimize every interaction between you and your prospective client from the point they meet you for the first time until the point at which time they become a client, and then how do you maintain that client relationship from there on out. If you don't have a process, your winging it not only makes you look inconsistent, it really doesn't ensure any measure of quality control as your firm starts to grow. Now it's just a bunch of guys out there doing their own thing, almost as if, and we keep using in football analogies, because of course you played football when you were at Robert Morris, but it would almost be like watching a bunch of well, when you coached flag football for Maddox, and you know you'd hike, and these
Right.
kids are
They're
they're
all
just running all over the place.
right.
It's
Yeah.
absolute chaos.
Yes. Yes.
And a well-coached football team, everybody knows what the offense is. They know what the play looks like within that offense, and everybody knows what part they're supposed to play. And then when you look at game films after the fact, you can say, okay, here's how the play is supposed to run.
Right.
What route are you running out here?
Yes.
And what blocking assignment did you miss over here?
Yes.
And now you have the ability to correct course and learn from your mistakes, okay? And replicate the right things, avoid the wrong things, but especially as you grow a team and you have
Mhm.
everybody operating from the same playbook, now you start to see synergy, and you start to see the ability to create a method of doing your business, not only on the planning side, but on the sales side that's
Yeah.
consistent across the board. That gives you the ability to grow. It gives you the ability to replace key personnel as they get promoted into different roles, because the person who's filling their role isn't doing it dramatically different from what they did. And the power in that is, it's important, I think, as you grow a firm. I think I think the thing that happens is that when salespeople are winging it, um, is they tend to do one of two things. They rely on their relationship building skills, or they rely on their expertise. And the problem with that is, as you pointed out in one of our earlier episodes, some people don't really want to waste time on building a relationship. They're looking for your knowledge and expertise to help them solve the problem. They don't have to love you. Contrary to what a lot of people think, a prospect needs to respect you more than they need to like you. If you're seeking to get them to like you, sometimes we'll do the wrong things. If you're seeking to get them to respect you, you'll stay true to your process and do what's right by them, even though they might not want to hear the answers you're giving them, because you are the financial doctor.
That's right.
If a doctor wanted to be liked,
Yeah.
they would never tell the patient the bad news.
That's right.
They would never get, it's funny because, not to get off track here, but
I just want to add one point to that. The doctor would never tell the bad news.
yeah,
One of the most powerful things about the advanced agreement that we talk about a lot of the times is letting people know that they have the permission to say no.
yeah,
But also the fact that if I feel that I can't help, I'm going to let you know.
mm-hmm,
And I'll be upfront with you.
mm-hmm,
Boy, does that give you the permission to deliver bad news.
yeah,
Based on everything that you shared with me, I don't believe that you're on the right track. And here's why. And you can go boom, 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 boom. And if you don't make a change, your retirement is going to be a flip of a coin.
yeah. Who wants to rely on a flip of a coin as to whether they're going to have a successful retirement?
That's right.
It reminds me.
And I believe I can help you.
I tell the story in my training about the primary care physician that I went to, just under 2 years now, but he was new for me. And the person I had been going to see basically knew that I had a problem with statins and didn't come up with anything new. And he'd look at my numbers, and I'd walk out of there every time feeling like I was on the right track when in fact I wasn't. And this goes back again to the concept of pain. I went to this new primary care physician. He made me extremely uncomfortable, but in a good way. He held my feet to the fire And when I tried to dismiss the fact that I had a problem, he said to me very nurturingly, Larry, I appreciate the fact that you've done a lot of homework on your own. I'd like you to appreciate the fact that I've been in this business for 25 years, and I've never seen anybody with numbers like that who didn't have a problem. I'd like you to have another test done just to confirm one way or another as to whether there's something that we need to address. I didn't like hearing that. I didn't like it because I was in denial. I wasn't experiencing any symptoms. When I had the test done, as you well know, we discovered that I had total blockage on one side of my heart, 80% on the other side. That guy saved my life. And he saved my life because he didn't care whether or not I liked him.
Right.
He cared whether I respected him. He was going to do his job. He followed his process. He encouraged me to get a test, and that test exposed a problem I didn't know I had. Who do you think my hero is today? Who do you think I have referred 5 times now? That primary care physician. Now,
All
still,
because of what I think I want to stress here is being liked in the business of selling. Every salesperson thinks it's all about building a relationship. And what people don't understand is that with the client builder process, you are building a relationship by virtue of asking these specific questions
right,
and going down through the diagnosis step.
right,
You will not say one word about yourself, what you do, how big your family is, where you went on vacation, whether you fish, whether you hunt. You will say nothing but ask them questions. And at the end, they will say to you, gosh, we just really like you.
yeah,
That's what I did to my wife.
yeah,
Well, when I met her, for 2 hours, all I did was ask her questions about herself. She didn't know a thing about me. We left and she says, I had the best time of my life and I would love to see you again. This is when we were dating.
yeah.
She goes, but I realized I know nothing about you.
Because your focus was all on her.
It was all on her.
You were curious. You were interested in learning about her.
That's right.
Ask any woman whether they want to hear some guy go on and on about himself. And
No.
I'll tell you, they can handle that for all of about 20 seconds.
Yeah, and that's the sales, the financial advisor that thinks they're going to be wowing the prospect by their intelligence
Right,
or their skill set. You're wrong.
right.
It's not going to happen.
No. So the process, like you said, it builds a relationship,
Yep.
just by virtue of the questions you
Yes.
ask as you go through the diagnosis step. Now, the thing I want us to emphasize, the thing I want our listeners to recognize is that when it comes to this process, first of all professionals have a process. Take a surgeon. You think he just goes out there and wings it?
No.
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 Take an accountant when he's preparing a tax return or when he's doing a financial audit. Is he winging it? No. He's following a process. Every professional follows a process. Lawyers follow a process. We're no different. And a relationship by itself is not enough to get somebody to commit to working with you.
That's right.
Now, the thing I also want people to understand that when it comes to this process, a lot of the things that we teach in this process, they'll say, well, I do that. Okay.
Yeah.
The question is, when do you do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
The order, the sequence.
The sequence, it's incredibly important. It's critical that in the first several minutes of a sales call, you open up with an advance agreement. You don't wait until you're halfway through the sales call to establish the parameters. You do it right up front. It's critical that you go into the diagnosis step first, because frankly, if you're not able to uncover the pain, it's over.
That's right.
I don't care how strong the relationship is. I don't care what your expertise is. If they don't have a compelling personal, emotional reason to change, you're not going to win their business. So let's figure that out first, okay? The next step in the process is what we call the investment, or sometimes I'll say investment slash sacrifice. It's what does that person have to give up in order to gain your help? So, in the world of financial services, it revolves around several things. So, the diagnosis step, like we said, is all about uncovering pain. If there's no pain, the sale's not going to go forward.
That's right.
Okay. So, if there's no pain, we're going to wrap up that first appointment after 30, 40 minutes. It's done. Okay. Now, some
By the
people,
way, that's very difficult for the prospect to hear.
it
When
is.
they get turned down and you say, look, based on what you've shared with me, I don't think there's anything I can do for you. You seem to have everything under control. And
Sometimes that's the first time that they finally become
yes,
truthful with you.
yes.
So it's
And
not.
and that by that time we go, well, unfortunately, I'm out of time. If you want to talk about this more, it sounds like you got a lot to tell me. We can schedule another meeting, but I've got to ask, if we schedule another meeting, um, do you think that you would be committed at some point to moving forward? And not all the time, but in most cases, they would say yes.
Well, I love the appointment that you told me about with a couple that came in and they really had their guard up.
Yeah.
And they told you that they weren't going to make any decisions today. And they were talking to 3 other firms
Mm-hmm.
and they're generally pretty happy. And so you established the advance agreement up front,
Mm-hmm.
told them, if I don't think I can help,
Mm-hmm.
um, I'm going to let you know. And I want you to feel comfortable telling me the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that immediately started to disarm them, right? And then you proceeded to follow your process
Mm-hmm.
and you asked them an awful lot of questions. Now, the meeting's coming to an end. You start folding up your notebook, and they said, "Is that it?" I said, "Yeah, I think it would be premature for us to have another appointment. I mean, after all, you've told me that you have 3 or 4 other people that you want to see. And what you said at the start of our meeting today is that um, you're pretty content with what you've been doing, and you just wanted to hear what we had to say. So yeah, I think it would be premature for us to schedule another meeting." And the guy stopped you and he said to you, "Well, I kind of like what I've heard here today."
And
And
I didn't say anything.
and what did he hear you do?
He just heard me ask him questions. He heard himself.
Exactly.
He heard himself.
Yes.
But by hearing himself, he thinks he heard me.
Right.
But he did hear me, because my questions, the questions that we have in Client Builder, those questions generate the responses so that they can hear themselves verbalize
Right.
what they need to hear.
And it's got to come from them
Yes.
because they trust their own words.
Correct.
If you were to tell
Yeah,
them
they
the
don't trust
exact same thing, they wouldn't trust you.
No.
Okay.
No, absolutely.
But so back to that, that's where the sale's typically made, is in the diagnosis step. So we open the call with an advance agreement. We get into the diagnosis. By the time we're done with the diagnosis, they're already leaning in. They're already hoping that they can afford to work with you. They already want to work with you. Okay, if we've done a good diagnosis step. If we didn't find pain, it's over. But if we found pain, they're leaning in. But at this point now, and this is why I say, oftentimes people will say to me, "Well, I do all those things." Yeah, but you don't do them in the right sequence.
Yes.
Because the time to talk about whatever they have to sacrifice or invest with you in the form of paying your fee, in the form of breaking up with their existing advisor, maybe giving up control if they're a do-it-yourselfer. We're going to talk about those things on the heels of having developed the pain.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to do that because we've used the fire analogy. Brian, you know this. What happens to that fire the minute they're no longer in your presence and you're not asking them questions?
It starts to smolder.
It starts to diminish.
Yeah.
So if we don't build that fire big and hot, a week from now, when we have our follow-up appointment,
It won't go well.
it won't go well.
That's right.
Okay, because they will have forgotten. The rest of their life will have basically blown that fire out. So we want to talk about what they have to give up to work with us right on the heels of building that pain. Now, let me ask you a question. When it's time to talk about your fee, if somebody were to come to you right out of the gate and say, "What do you typically charge for managing somebody's assets?" If you were to answer that question before you had done any diagnosis, what's the likelihood that that number is going to be palatable to them?
Oh, close to zero. And that's why you have to be able to say, that's a great question. Why do you ask?
That's right.
And what that's going to do is it's going to buy you time to say to them, we're going to get into that. But
But
before we,
you're on page 7.
yes,
I'm still back
yes.
on page 1.
And a lot of guys don't know, a lot of advisors don't know how to address those real direct prospects that come out right out of the gates and start asking those questions,
Yeah.
because that will happen even when you start to learn this process. And these are other techniques like, that's a great question. Why do you ask that? We're not stalling, but I do want to know the reason behind the question,
Right.
right? But I also want to be able to be a professional and go, let's table that for a moment,
Yeah.
and we're going to get to it,
And in all
because I don't even know if I can help yet.
exactly. And in all candor, you don't know what that fee is going to look like to them, because as a retirement planning specialist, you don't know how much of that money is going to go into an annuity.
That's right.
You don't know how much
That's
money
right.
is going to be AUM. Obviously, if it's an annuity, the insurance company is going to be paying the fee. It's
Mm-hmm.
not going to impact them at all. If it's AUM, and that AUM might vary depending on how much money they're investing with you.
Mm-hmm.
The percentage, some different advisors have a range. But and my other favorite is when somebody comes to you and says, "So why should I hire you to be my financial advisor?" And
I
believe it
don't.
or not,
You might not want to hire me as your finance advisor, or
exactly,
maybe you shouldn't hire me.
I don't know.
Yeah,
Because at this point,
Be-
I don't know if I can help you. But
an untrained salesperson is going to give some type of diarrhea of the mouth when they're challenged directly like that. So why should I even hire you? What do you got? Well, because we've got a team of people, and we've got a very unique process in the way that we pick our investment portfolios, and we've got an algorithm that we uses that determines when to buy and sell and all.
and
Come on, are you
we're
kidding me?
fiduciaries,
Yeah,
and
right.
everybody
Yeah,
in our
yes,
office happens
yes.
to be a CFP.
Right.
None of
No.
that
Blah,
matters.
blah, 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 blah.
You
It's
know,
Charlie Brown.
it's Charlie
Wah, wah,
Brown's,
wah.
the parents'
Yeah.
voices, and Charlie Brown, or the
Yes.
teachers' exactly. It doesn't mean anything. And I think about the time when I had shoulder surgery years ago, and I had gone in to see the orthopedic surgeon, gave me a couple of shots of steroids, and my God, I was Paul Skeens pitching batting practice for the next several weeks. And then once it wore off, I could barely, bring my coffee cup to my lips. And I went in and I said, "Man, the steroids were great." He says, "Well, like I told you, it's temporary." Um, and he starts getting into a diagnosis of what was causing my shoulder pain. And as he's asking me these questions, I got the sense that he knew the answers before he even asked the question.
I'm
And
so glad you brought that up.
it made me realize, oh, he gets it. Now, there was no point where he ever talked to me about the fact that he works with all the Pittsburgh Pirates and the Steelers, and that he's, got a storied list of superstars that he's fixed their shoulder. Never had to do that. Never had to take me in and say, "Well, let me show you all my certifications and the education and how." It was the diagnosis that made me realize, oh, he knows what the problem is. And the way he handled that diagnosis in a nurturing, confident manner made me believe, just by virtue of what questions he asked, that he had the skill and the knowledge to fix my shoulder. Now,
Mm-hmm.
the key here is, though, that the diagnosis step is the most important step and the first step in the process. Once we've built that fire, though, now we have to talk about what they have to give up. If they have an advisor, we got to let them know you're going to have to break up with that advisor. So if that advisor that they currently use is somebody that they have a long-standing relationship morphing into, best example I can give of that is when I began working with you. The financial advisor that I was working with happened to be the leader of a men's group that I was
Yeah,
involved in at
right. Yes.
church. And
Yeah.
he was, that men's group was very important to me
Hmm.
to help me heal from my divorce.
Hmm.
It was going to be so awkward leaving him and moving to you that I had to come to terms with the fact that if I'm moving my money away from him over to you, I'm going to have to give up the group. My pain was great enough to where I was willing to give up the group along with that financial advisor.
Hmm.
So that's the first thing we have to explore. Are they willing to break off their relationship with their existing advisor? If they've never used an advisor before, we got to give them some idea as to what they're going to have to pay in the way of fees. Okay. And that sometimes can be a wake up call
Hmm.
for the do it yourselfer
Hmm.
because they've never paid a fee
Right.
before. The
Correct.
other thing with the do it yourselfer is for the first time in their life, they have to trust somebody else's judgment and they have to give up control. Okay. Those are things that I want to talk about after the diagnosis step when that fire is still burning hot. Okay. If they're not willing to give up control, break it off with their existing advisor, or pay a fee, and at that point, we're only going to give them a range of what it's likely to be because we don't know exactly. If they're not willing to make that investment, no matter how much pain they have, if that pain doesn't rise to the level to where it's greater than what they're willing to invest with you, it's over.
Right.
Okay. Now, most of us save the fee
Hmm.
until the second or maybe the third meeting.
Wrong.
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 Because if they're not willing to pay a fee, we want to find out sooner rather than later. And if we have this belief that, well, once they hear my plan,
They see it all.
once they
And
see
I
it
wow
all,
them.
and I wow them, they're just going to lay down. Well, you know what? They don't.
They don't.
And what happens is you wind up in the position of an unpaid consultant.
That's right.
They get your expertise without having to pay for it. They thank you, and you never hear from them again. So,
I had another great mentor, David Gaylor, who said to me, even if something's brought up in a first meeting, something like, well, I've got a really great relationship with my advisor, or, um, you know, I'm not a big fan of annuities, or whatever they say. If you don't draw a line in the sand
mhm,
and do battle right there, you are not going to win on that second meeting.
that's right.
So you have to flush that out.
Right.
So I might say to somebody, look, I feel based on what you've shared. If I've built the fire big enough and I say to them, look, I feel based on what you share with me, I can really help you. But I don't know if I want to take the next step moving forward with you. And they'll look
Yeah.
confused. And I'll say, well, here's my concern. You've been working with your advisor for 25 years. I mean, how is that conversation going to go when you tell him that you're leaving to a new advisor that you just went to a dinner seminar?
Yeah.
A dinner seminar?
Versus my 25 years of,
You went to a dinner seminar and got sold on that?
yeah.
You notice how I'm saying this. And I
Yeah.
want to say it like that because that's most likely how he's going to present it.
Yes.
Right? So I want to make it sound like this dirty, a dinner seminar that you got sold at, you got an invitation to. They're like, what do you do? Try to sell you an annuity?
Wow.
Flushing it all out.
Yeah.
So what do you want to do about this? Do you want to move forward?
Wow. I feel like I'm the student. No, seriously. I mean, and I love the way you're positioning those questions. But I think one of the things that when we talk about using a system, one of the things that I want to get across to our listeners here is we flip the sales process on its ear. We turn it upside down. And instead of us, and we're going to get into this in a future episode, but instead of us trying to sell them, they're selling us. They're selling us on the fact that they really, really need our help,
Yeah.
that they have problems compelling enough to want to make changes. They have to prove to us that they're willing to pay our fee, and they have to prove to us that they're willing to make a decision one way or another. If they can't do those three things, they don't get a second meeting and they don't get to see our recommendations. And so,
And most advisors, Larry, are afraid to say that. They're afraid to walk away. But what they don't realize is that by walking away, usually what happens is that prospect takes a step forward.
yeah,
For example, when I say, look, I feel like I can help you, but I don't know if I want to move forward to the next meeting, and here's why. When you get that look of shock on their face, here's what you'll typically hear. Well, our relationship isn't that great.
exactly.
Or the wife is like, I've been telling you forever to leave them.
Yeah,
And you're just going, okay, now
yeah,
here comes the truth.
yes,
Right? Because don't take it for face value where they go, I've been working with this person for 25 years. We've got a great relationship. They've done really well for me. Don't let that bother you to the point to where you're going, this is done. It's over with.
right,
Because when you tell them you can help, all of a sudden it's not as great of a relationship.
right.
And the wife usually hates the person they work with.
Yeah, yeah. And then the other thing that I think is important is we're going through the process. We're consistently stoking the fire. So at the end of the diagnosis step, we take everything we've learned in the
Yes.
first half of the meeting, we summarize it. We summarize by saying, okay, you've told me about your concerns regarding whether or not you have enough money to retire. You've told me about your concerns related to whether that money is going to be enough. Is there any danger of running out? Talk to me a little bit about your tax concerns. It says, have I missed anything? This is where we validate it. So it's summarize, validate. Have I missed anything? Is there anything else you'd like to share? Okay. Now, this makes them feel really good. As you well know, when you summarize and validate, they start leaning in like they're paying attention. Okay. And then the next step is what I call gauging commitment. And this is where you say, are these concerns compelling enough to where you want to make some changes? Now, when I pose that question, I'm going to hear one of three things. Okay. Ideally, I'd love to hear absolutely. At that point, I'm going to give them a gentle push away or a subtle takeaway. I'm going to say, well, hold on. We haven't talked at all about what it means to work with us in terms of what the fee is likely to be, the fact that you're going to have to break off the relationship with your existing advisor if you have one.
That's so good.
So that's my segue into talking about whatever sacrifice or investment they need to make. Now,
that pause of, well, hold on.
yeah.
Like,
because remember,
yeah.
And we haven't talked at length about this, but one of our principles is selling as a process of disqualification. We don't know yet whether they're willing to make that sacrifice.
Right.
Okay. Then you get the person that says, not really. And that's where he says, I didn't think so. So what did we miss? What did we not talk about here today? Or what were you hoping to hear today? And now we're going to go with the last resort question. And we'll talk about what those last resort questions look like. Or it may be where we go with an assumptive question. And we'll talk about that in the future. How we talk about what we would do in the context as if their advisor did the same thing, which is what exposes how different we are from the others.
Yeah. Those last resort questions have gotten me so many deals.
Yeah. And then we gauge, and then we have the other one where we say it depends. Now, at the end
depends on what you show me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that depends is okay at the end of the diagnosis step because they don't know enough to decide whether or not they can work with you or not. They don't know what they have to give up. They don't know what you're going to show them. And so that becomes a segue to get into the investment/sacrifice step. And then the next step after that is let's talk about how you make decisions. Okay. in addition to yourselves, is there anybody else we need to pull into this conversation? Some people, they might have a son or a daughter that might work for a financial institution, or they foresee them being the executor. Do we need to bring your son or daughter into this conversation now so that they understand what your retirement plan looks
Now,
like?
I'm going to say that somebody listening to this might think to themselves, why would you ever ask that question? Because you're going to open up a can of worms that you don't need to open up. But I will tell you that is probably one of the most important questions to ask, because how many advisors had a deal blown up because their son that lives all the way across the other side of the country
Yeah.
says, you're doing what?
Don't you know that you should hate annuities? And here's, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
if that person,
and this is doing the battle that I talk about. You're doing the battle right there, because what are you going to do? Go to this? They're going to say, yeah, let's go. You're going to go to the second meeting not knowing any of that stuff.
That's right.
And get turned down, or I want to think about it, because that's why you're getting, I want to think about it.
That's right. And so essentially what we're doing when we're asking these questions, we're trying to close off the escape hatches. Okay. We don't want to use, we all use that excuse.
It's a great.
We've all done this. So Brian, think about how many times has somebody come to your house to try and sell you something and said, well, I can't make the decision by myself.
Yes,
I
right.
gotta run it by the boss.
Yes,
meaning our spouse.
Yeah, that's fine.
When in fact,
we
can make the decision.
Right.
We just use it as an excuse. So we got to take that excuse away up front. Okay, in the first meeting. In addition to that, we want to talk about, okay, so typically what we would show you at our next meeting are, and we summarize what your presentation is going to look like. Mm-hmm. You use something called the third-party story, which we'll talk in more detail.
We found very effective.
Very effective, and it's great. I love how you do it. But we're using that also as the means to find out, what type of a decision maker is this? Is this somebody who's going to be able to make a decision at the next meeting? Or are they going to need to spend some time doing their due diligence? Are there some resources that we could provide them to help them with their due diligence? If I find that I have somebody who is not going to be able to make a decision because of, Daddy always said, you got to get 3 quotes. You got to talk to 3 advisors. Yes. Well, you know what I'm going to show at the next meeting? A conceptual overview of how we build a retirement plan, but I'm not going to give them their plan. I'm going to table that for the third meeting. This is one of those places.
And this is what you call the sidestep or a stutter step, right? It's you're just sidestepping.
Yes.
A little bit. You're still giving them something.
Yes.
But we don't want to give it all.
But we can't force somebody to make a decision.
That's right.
On our timetable.
Correct.
They're going to make decisions the way they make decisions. I just want to know how they make decisions. Mm-hmm. So I want to know who's involved, how they make decisions. I want to know what they want to see or hear from us. I want to know who else they're talking to. And you and I had some good dialogue around this the first time you heard my advice on this. You couldn't believe that I suggested that you postpone your presentation until after they've had a chance to talk to the other advisors.
Yes.
Well, the fact of the matter is they have just told you that they can't make a decision until they hear what everybody else has got to say. Well, then, if that's the type of decision maker they are, I want to have last look. I want to be the one that they talk to at the end, to where they're now able to make a decision because there's nobody else to talk to.
On the next episode, I want to get into this, but when you ask the question of, who else do you plan on talking to? Is there anyone else? People are afraid of asking that question because what if they weren't planning on talking to anyone else? What if they've shown you that, we just love what you have? Be careful. Be careful.
Yeah.
Because those deals that you think are easy because they're eating out of your hands are the ones that blow up on you the most.
Yeah.
And
we get happy years.
And by asking, are you planning on going and seeing anybody else? Sometimes you might get the answer back where, I wasn't, but should I? And we're going to talk about how to answer that.
We will. We'll use that as our teaser for the
next episode.
But the key that I want to emphasize here, I know we've got to wrap up today, is there's a sequence to this
Yeah.
process.
Very
There are
important.
clearly defined steps, and there's essentially a checklist of the information that we need to uncover, the questions that we need to ask at each and every step along the way. And if we skip a step or we gloss over a step, that's where the process will come back to bite us. That's where it gives them an out. So it's very, very important that we follow the process. Now, the beauty of that is that once you have that process down, okay, the answers you get back from your prospects aren't always the same,
Right.
but the questions that you ask are.
That's right.
And it gives you a sense of control, a sense of confidence, and the competence that people who are merely winging it never rise to. So having that system, so we've talked about a lot of principles, and we've talked about the diagnosis step in particular, a little bit about the investment sacrifice step, but I want you, our listeners, to understand it's all built in to a sequential process. One step leads to the next, leads to the next. Now, one thing about a process, it doesn't mean that every prospect becomes a client.
That's right.
It enhances the odds of us winning that opportunity, winning that prospect. But it also enhances our ability to disqualify that prospect before we waste too much time. Because there's nothing more frustrating than to schedule 3 or 4 appointments with a prospective client only to get to think it over.
That's right.
And now you're in chase mode. And is there anything worse?
And that's why I want you to have a process and a system that whether you get a new client or you don't get a new client, you know that you gave yourself the highest probability of success in that conference room. Because I know what it's like to be in that conference room and feel out of control. And what this does is puts control back in your hands. And so we'll see you again on the next episode.